All right, welcome everybody. This is Carrie at the Department of Higher Education. Thank you for joining us today for this important webinar on building partnerships with athletics to prevent sexual violence. In a moment, I will turn the presentation over to Lindsay Miller, formerly Lindsay White, at Wright State University, to talk about some of the work that they have been doing to build those partnerships and strengthen them. Just a reminder that if you have not already muted your phone or your computer, to please do so to minimize background noise. I am recording this webinar for others who are unable to join us today, or for you yourselves if you would like to share it later on. So please keep any noise in and around your office to a minimum, or wherever you are listening in today. As you know, we did some work with you all and assessed what campuses were or were not doing to work more closely with their athletic departments to prevent sexual violence last spring. And in those reports, I was able to see that Wright State had been making some efforts and strides towards building a strategic plan for prevention and response with their athletic department. And so I reached out to Lindsay to find out if she could share some of the work that they had been doing this fall to get that off the ground, and even before that, to really help bridge that gap and work with the subpopulation that's on their campus, where we do see a lot of headlines regarding sexual and gender-based violence issues arising. So very thankful that Lindsay agreed to do that and share their efforts at Wright State. So Lindsay, without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. So I'm going to share a little bit today about kind of what our process was, kind of how we got to where we are today. I realize that our approach is probably not a one-size-fits-all. We are a very unique campus, both in our size and kind of the athletic programs that we have. But again, this is what worked for me. And I'll talk a little bit about my background as we go through. But I was a college athlete, a Division I college athlete. I played basketball. And so some of the approach that I have been taking is both built on kind of nationally what's happening, kind of what's happening locally with us, but also taking it from my experience as a college athlete and kind of trying to infuse that into how I make connections kind of with the athletic department. So I realize that that background might be very different from some of you on the line, but like I said, I'm going to share with you kind of what has worked for me, and maybe you can take something away from that. So for you all on the line who might not know kind of who we are, Wright State is a Division I school. We are part of the Horizon League. We have about 10 or 11, I think 11, sports that we have. We eliminated swimming 2 years ago, but we do have the big ones except football. So for men, we have baseball, basketball, cross country, golf, soccer, and tennis. And then for women, we have basketball, cross country, soccer, softball, tennis, track and field, and volleyball. So the slide up right now, how we got here. When I got here 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I guess now, we had a number of cases that had come out of the athletic department. Nothing horrific, comparatively speaking, but we definitely had a number of them that were coming out of that department. And so we kind of wanted to look at those cases, and I kind of used those as a jumping off point with the athletic department to say, hey, look, these are happening in your department. Let's talk about what's going on here. What can we do to help this? And if you ever had any kind of interactions with the athletic department or any athletes over there or coaches, they're very competitive, even when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? And so you'll hear me reference kind of looking at the game film a lot because that resonates with them. When I say to them, you know, the game film is showing me that you have these cases in your area. This isn't just campus-wide. You know, we've had a handful of them come out of your area. This is an issue. For some reason, that has kind of resonated with them, and the light bulb has kind of gone off for them to say, okay, maybe we do need to start paying attention to that. So that's kind of where we started. So if you haven't already, and I'm sure you do keep track of this, but look and see, do you have cases that are coming out of there and how you can use those? And then some of the other things up here, obviously the national headlines. I mean, the past 2 years, it's been a gold mine in terms of real-world national level examples that you can use from different institutions for teaching points. You know, why did this school get in trouble? What could we have done differently? And I spend a lot of time with the athletic department talking and emailing with them about those kinds of things. NCAA policy, for those of you who aren't aware, the NCAA Board of Governors put out a policy on sexual violence. I have kind of the highlights on the next slide, but that was also a real motivator because it finally put in writing something from the NCAA that's compliance related that they have to abide by. And so that was a real help for me. And then obviously ODHE kind of putting feelers out to ask what everyone was doing also helped because, you know, we were able to say there's a lot of people from a lot of different areas that are starting to ask, you know, what we're doing. And so really what we did, or what I did, is I scheduled a meeting with my athletic director, my SWA, and my general counsel, and we just talked about what our current efforts were, what we needed to do to get in compliance with this new policy, and really kind of did an audit, essentially, of what we were doing. And the conversation, and you all probably have had this before, but it's always going to be that the athletic department thinks that they are doing more than they actually are, or they are doing more than, and we will always think that they aren't doing enough, right? And I'll talk a little bit about how that plays out, but we kind of came to the realization that, yes, that's great, we are doing a few things in the athletic department, but it wasn't enough, right? We were only doing things 1 to 2 times a year for 30 minutes here and there, and that just wasn't enough. And so we started talking about, well, how do we change that, and how do we make it fit into kind of this world of athletics? The other thing that kind of came out was that we really needed to memorialize something in writing with the athletic department and my office, the Office of Equity and Inclusion, kind of like an MOU, because both my office and the athletic department is a very transient area, and especially with the athletic department, people are leaving all the time. And for Wright State, who's a mid-level Division I school, it's a very real possibility that people come here as a stepping stone to larger institutions. And so we wanted to make sure that we kind of had all of our efforts kind of put in writing, not necessarily in a policy, but kind of like an understanding with the athletic department. And so that's mostly what I'm going to go through today. Carrie, if you want to go to the next slide. Here's the NCAA policy. I imagine by now everybody knows about this, but if you don't, these are kind of the highlights from the policy. They kind of laid out some principles, and then kind of this last piece about what we must annually attest to. In my opinion, this thing should be your best friend if you're having trouble getting into your athletic department, because essentially what this policy is making you do on a yearly basis is to sign your name to say, my athletic department is doing all of these things, right? And the president has to sign off and say, our athletic department is doing all these things. And the athletic director has to sign off and say, our department is doing all these things. I flat out told our athletic department, I will not sign this unless we do this, right? I'm not putting my name on something that I know is untrue, right? And I think it helped to have general counsel in the meeting during that initial meeting, but I really used this as some leverage to say, at the very least, this is what we have to be doing because this is something I have to put my name on, right? Also, for those of you who don't know about this policy, there are some consequences to not doing this every year. I think the jury's a little bit out on what those actually are. The policy specifically says that you can't host postseason play if you don't attest to this every year. However, I will tell you that I was sitting with some folks from the NCAA office at another conference who told me that they interpreted that to mean that you can't participate in postseason play if you don't attest to this. So those are two very different things. I'm inclined to listen to the NCAA folks, and so I communicated that message to my department as well, that there's a very real likelihood that we can't participate in postseason play if we don't attest and do these things every year. You can go to the next one, Carrie. So, like I said, our idea was to kind of put together a document, really, that kind of just outlines everything that we want to do to get in compliance and stay in compliance, really, with this NCAA policy. And we called it internal operating procedures. Obviously, you could probably call it anything you wanted, but this was really our opportunity to, again, memorialize what we're trying to do between the athletic department and my office and really plan for people leaving, new people coming, things like that, and really just a reference document to say, okay, what is it that we said we were going to do about this and things like that. So what I'm going to do today is kind of walk through a lot of the big areas that we decided to include in the internal operating procedures. And what I will say I have written down here, this was really a suggestion by my general counsel to put all of this in writing so that everybody's on the same page about where our obligations are, where our responsibilities are, and it really allows us to hold people accountable. If, we say we're going to do one thing and we're not doing it, aside from the NCAA policy, but we also have these internal operating procedures that we can hold people accountable for. So the first big one, the first big area is our senior woman administrator. If you don't know your senior woman administrator, get to know her. It's a really good ally in the athletic department. Part of the reason that athletic departments are obligated to have a senior woman administrator is for issues like this. So you should be utilizing that person to the best of your ability. This is our great senior woman administrator. Her name is Joylyn Brown. She would probably kill me if she knew I had this picture of her up here, but she has been fantastic. We have worked together on almost all of the cases that came out of the athletic department. We have gotten to be really great colleagues, and she feels very comfortable just picking up the phone and calling me when something goes wrong or she has a question or a hypothetical, and vice versa. And so, again, if you don't have a relationship with this person, you should cultivate one, ask them out for coffee, just get to know them, because it will end up being your strongest ally over there in the athletic department. In our operating procedures, we have it specifically designated that she will serve as a Deputy Title IX coordinator, that she is the resource in the athletic department where these reports should be headed. I will say we do make it clear also that people don't have to go to that person, right? You definitely don't want the message in the athletic department to be, this is the only person you can report to. So we do carve out that little exception when we do kind of some of our onboarding and our staff orientations to say, this is who we would prefer that you go to, but you're not obligated to, right? If your issue is with the senior woman administrator or you don't feel comfortable discussing that kind of stuff with her, you can always come to me and come right to my office. And this is a piece that we got some feedback on some of the staff that they didn't realize that they could do that. And so, me on the outside, I like to think that everybody knows that they can always come to see me. But the reality is that athletic departments are very different. They are a very close-knit group of people, and going outside of athletics is a foreign concept for them. And so we really took strides to say, we want you to go there, but you don't have to. The other thing we put in here was that she will receive annual or biannual training from an outside entity. And the reason that we put this in here in writing is that her schedule is crazy. In addition to being an athletic director, a senior woman administrator, and a sports supervisor, I'm now asking her to do kind of some of this Title IX work, and she needs training from an outside entity, and she needs to have time scheduled to go and do that. And so that's kind of why we put this piece in our operating procedures. There's also, I put a line in here that says the athletic departments will assist her with her schedule to accommodate these training needs. So really just putting that in black and white that this is a priority, her schedule needs to allow it, and making sure we're able to do this going forward. The next big chunk we talked about putting some stuff together was the student-athlete onboarding. We realized that, for those of you who don't know, and I'll tell you kind of a personal story with this. So when I went to Ohio University to play basketball, and when I went there, the athletic department and my coach asked me to come to summer school the summer before my freshman year, right? So I graduated and then left for school, went to summer school, and then started, with the rest of the freshmen. What I didn't do is have a traditional orientation experience. I never went to orientation with the rest of the college community. I never went to a resource fair. All of the stuff that I see our students go through from this end, I never went through as an athlete, right? So if you are relying on your orientation efforts for the rest of the campus community, you might not be hitting all those athletes. You likely aren't hitting a lot of those athletes because the reality is they do their own thing. They have their own orientation because they get there at different times, right? And so that was kind of the purpose behind putting this in here, was just to make aware, if somebody ever comes and has my position who doesn't have an athletic background and wouldn't know that, they would know, hey, we need to make an effort to get into these student-athlete orientations. And when you see SA in my presentation, that stands for student-athlete, just for the record. I had some conversations with our athletic department about whether that stands for sexual assault or student-athlete. In the athletic world, SA is student-athlete. So showing up in person, I try to make an effort to every single annual student-athlete orientation, they get to see my face. They put a name with a face, they see me, they know me, so that they feel comfortable going outside athletics to make any of those reports, right? I'm there and I present with Joy Lynn to say, hey, this is our senior woman administrator and possibly your sports supervisor, depending on what sport you play, but this is also our Title IX coordinator and this is what she does, and I introduce myself and things like that. It's not a horribly long presentation, but the point is really just for them to see me and to get to know me. We also want to put stuff into the individual team-specific meetings. So every fall and spring, all of our teams have beginning of the year meetings. I imagine most of your athletic departments are like that too. But this is where I would have the SWA or the sports supervisor kind of discuss reporting options and things like that, right? And so what we're really trying to do here, and I'll talk about it a little bit later in our training section, is we're trying to hit them at different points throughout their career, right? We found that one or two times just isn't enough, but we don't have enough time to dedicate huge chunks of time to this information, right? Their time is different. Their blocks of time are different. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to do kind of bite-sized education pieces with them from multiple places, right? And so we do it with the annual student-athlete orientation, and then we do it again in their specific team meetings, right? So I will have Joy Lynn or whoever the sports supervisor is, which is normally one of our other athletic directors, just go in there and say, this is who I am, this is what you can report to me, and you also have this other reporting option as well. Eventually, we'd like to move to where I can appear at some of those team meetings, or someone from my office can come to those meetings. However, we have not been able to get to that point, mostly because it's just me over here in the office. So this is kind of what we're doing right now. The other piece is our staff meetings. So just like we're trying to do some bite-sized stuff with the student athletes, we also try to hit the staff as well. Again, they're a little bit easier to kind of pull together and get together and mandate that they go through this training, but they, again, have a tough time paying attention to this kind of stuff because to them, you are just another compliance person getting up in front of them and talking about rules, and you are the devil in their eyes because compliance is a dirty word sometimes in athletic departments. So I try to do a lot of different things. We try to get online training, do workshops, and do in-person stuff to kind of vary the learning method and to try to get those multiple touch points kind of with the athletic department. So something that I do is I appear at their annual all-staff meeting. I always have them, we're going to try to have them start doing an online kind of training beforehand that kind of hits all the compliance nuts and bolts, the boring stuff that really is just to check a box, right? We have them do that before they come to the annual all-staff meeting. And then at the annual all-staff meeting, again, this is a chance for them to see who I am, put a name to a face to say, hi, this is me, this is what I do, this is what my office does. We kind of briefly go over reporting options and what their reporting obligation is. I will field any kind of questions that came up from the online training. And then the meat of what I focus on in the in-person meeting, all-staff meetings, is any other topic that I deem appropriate, and that's how I have it written in the operating procedures. And I do it for this reason. For example, right before we had our all-staff meeting this year, Ohio State was in the news about Urban Meyer and all that stuff about the assistant coach and things like that. And so we knew that people were going to have questions about that. And so we spent some time talking about that. We also had some recruiting issues come up that kind of touched into Title IX stuff. So we talked about that. We also had, I think, some issues with some staff issues that we talked about. And so I like to leave a big chunk of time to talk about those kinds of things because at the end of the day, that's how you're really going to start teaching them kind of how this plays out in their everyday life is when you're talking about things that are happening on a national level or using examples within the athletic department and talking about how we could have done things differently. So that's what I like to do for the staff meetings. The next slide here is just kind of like a tip slide. If you haven't done this already, do it. Meet with your AD or your SWA or both and ask for feedback. They will know likely how the staff and students feel about the material you're giving them afterwards, right? Again, this is a very close-knit population. They will talk about how they thought it was boring, how they thought it was helpful, how they wished they would have had something. Talk to them. Talk to them and say, let's look at the game film. What did we do good? What did people feel was valuable? What do you think we were missing? And this is something I started doing after my first year here, because the first year that I did training with the athletic department, I kind of saw their faces kind of glaze over. And I just didn't want to do that. You know, this needs to be valuable for everybody, especially if you're only getting 20 to 30 minutes with them at a time. You want to make sure that you're appropriately using that. And so some of the stuff that came out I have up here is that they need a takeaway. And I mean, I guess I should have realized this, but I didn't. They are very focused on how is this going to help me immediately when I leave here. And so I always, when I go into those settings, I try to give them some type of takeaway, whether that's a brochure or a piece of paper about bullet points that we talked about, or a checklist, or you know, a reporting flow chart or something. It has to be something tangible that they can take away and immediately put to use, right? This year we talked about some recruiting strategies when it comes to people with Title IX histories, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that was a really great takeaway from them because it was literally a list of questions that we had put together to help them through that situation, right, and to help us stay in compliance at the same time. Has to be relevant to them. I mean, that one is obvious, but sometimes that gets lost in the sauce when we're worried about checking off all these compliance boxes and these new rules that we're talking about. You just have to find a way to speak their language and make it relevant to them. And then the last one, don't just be compliance. This is really tough, but to the extent that you can, don't just go in there and talk about policy and procedure because it won't resonate with them whatsoever. That's why, like I said, I like to do that piece as an online component before they come to anything in person because you will lose them if you start talking about that. Other areas that we kind of put in the operating procedures were some response protocols. Now, this might be something that other folks are really good at. Wright State right now does not have a really great response protocol in terms of timelines, who reports where, who gets called. We're kind of small enough that we are able to not have this in place. It's something that we're trying to change and trying to put together. So we kind of took this opportunity with the athletic department to really firm up these different ideas that we are eventually going to kind of put through for the whole campus. But some of the areas where we found we kind of had some gray area when we were talking to the athletic department is nobody knew what the timeline for reporting was, right? What if I'm down in Florida for a tournament for 5 days and something happens on Monday? Do I call you right then and tell you that that happened, even though you can't really do anything about it until we get back? Or do I wait until I get back? And what does that look like? Who do I call? When do I call? Things like that. So we kind of put some timelines in there and some language about that. Obviously, that's going to vary campus to campus with how you want to do that. A flow chart with reporting options. Again, I thought that this was pretty self-explanatory, but some of the athletic department kept asking for an actual flow chart. So we put that together. Our flow chart kind of looks like they can report to the sports supervisor, who can report to the senior woman administrator, who will then call me. That is the preferred method, obviously, but we also, you know, my reporting boxes are a little bit convoluted because there's arrows kind of everywhere because they can report to any of those areas. And again, I thought that was evident in how I was kind of giving the information and how we were training them, but apparently was not resonating with them. So they needed to see that, again, as a takeaway on a piece of paper. So we just kind of put that together. Utilizing response checklists, this is, again, something that not only the athletic department has asked for before, but a lot of faculty members ask for this. They want to make sure that they are checking off boxes on their end, so we kind of put one together for them. I was using it as kind of a responsible employee checklist, but we just adapted it to kind of an athletics checklist, kind of step-by-step what you should do, who you should call, what you should say, more importantly, things you shouldn't say, right? Were you drinking? What were you wearing? Things like that. So we kind of put that together for them and gave that, again, as a handout because, again, this is something that they were asking for. So, again, just keeping in mind kind of the feedback that the AD and the SWA are getting and kind of being able to put that in a usable format that we all can use. The other big thing that we did was with our website. Again, this might not be relevant for some of you. Some of you might have really great websites where you're directing people to your Title IX sites. Ours didn't have anything. When I went and looked at our athletic department website, I realized that it's very difficult for people to find my office and to find Joy Lynn for that matter, or to know that she's a deputy just on the athletic department website. And even if you go up to our search tab in our athletic department website and search terms related to sexual assault or sexual violence, you don't get to my site. So I learned that our athletic department website, as it might be for a lot of you, are really ran and managed by someone other than the university, right? So I think ours is managed by Sidearm Sports. So I assumed that in the athletic department search bar, for example, when they were searching those terms like Title IX or things like that, they were automatically getting connectable links that would link them to my site, which is how our main university website works. If you go to our main page and search anything related to my office, my page will pop up. That is not the case in the athletic department world. You'll have to go and check yours, but I wouldn't be surprised if yours is like this too. So we needed to make sure that it was easy to find us, and so we put it in the athletic department's compliance website. So you'll see here up on the slide we put this notice of non-discrimination. That's a new tab, and then the drop down is kind of what you're seeing. You can click on either of those. If you click on Office of Equity and Inclusion, obviously that will redirect you to our homepage. Title IX Coordinator will link you to Joy Lynn, and it will talk to you about what Joy Lynn's duties are with respect to Title IX so you can find kind of what's best for you. We also added our anonymous reporting tab up there to compliance. So again, take a look at what your website can do, and whether or not your students are having a difficult time, or your parents for that matter, are having a difficult time finding your office through that website. Because again, they're not going to go to the main university website. This is a website that they know. This is where they're going to go. And so it needs to be easily accessible from your athletics department webpage. Other things that we did, we updated some of our handbooks, our student athlete handbook and our staff handbook. Had not been updated in a very long time, so it's a really great idea to go and look at kind of what yours says, what it doesn't say, doesn't need to have updated information, and so we kind of put that in our internal operating procedures that we will continue to go and look at that, go and make sure that all of the correct contact information from everybody is in there. We will keep it updated. Policy procedure, I actually, when I looked at the handbook, I realized that the info about the policy hadn't been updated in a very long time, and we were using some outdated language with respect to our policy. So go make sure that whatever your student athlete or staff handbook says is what your policy actually is, because again, I was surprised to find that there were some things in there that certainly shouldn't be in there. Obviously, before the new Title IX proposed regulations came out, we weren't supposed to be doing informal resolutions or mediations for some types of cases. And when I went and looked at our policy and procedure in our handbook, it was specifically saying that we should do that. So just a tip, go and look, see what it says, see if you need to make updates, and continue to do that. Okay. Training, I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'll kind of go through kind of our approach to the training, and this is mostly geared, like I said, towards students. The staff, again, it's tough to get them all in a room at different times, but we can do it, and we can make it mandatory for them. Students, it's a little bit tougher, right? Student athletes, for those of you who aren't aware or have no idea about athletics, we are under really specific time constraints with them, right? So for us, Division I athletics, there's the 20 to 8 hour rule. And for those of you who are policy nerds, if you want to go and look at it, I say policy nerd because that's what I am. It's by Law 17 in the Division I rules. But it basically says that during season we can require athletes to do things athletically related for 20 hours per week. And that includes games, practices, film, athletically related travel, any kind of compliance meetings, any kind of team building, any kind of community service, any of that. You can go and look in Bylaw 17 where it talks about what is considered an athletically related countable hour. But the bottom line is you just don't have that much time that you can be requiring students to do things, right? And so getting them together for large chunks of time is you're just not going to be able to do it. There's not enough hours, especially in the off season. In the off season, we only have 8 hours to be able to do that with them, right? So we have to be very strategic about how we're getting that information to the students because, again, asking them to go and sit through a 1-hour compliance meeting, they might not have that much time left in that week, right? So kind of our approach to the training is really what I just call bite-sized education, that kind of multiple touch points of information and education. And so what we're trying to do is do a combination of things, workshops, speakers, and doing stuff online, and trying to touch them at different places that they might already be doing something athletically related, right? So it's we're kind of getting a 2-for-1. So I have the One Love kind of symbol up here. Partnering with your life skills is a really great idea. Life skills training happens in most athletic departments. For us, we have a whole lineup of things they do on a weekly, every other week basis, I think. And it's always relevant topics to kind of educating them and helping them develop outside of athletics, right? So it's this kind of holistic approach to what else do we need to be teaching our student athletes other than their sport. And so for our life skills, it's a lot of stuff about wellness, about finances, about things like that. And so what we did is we kind of partnered with our life skills person to say, where can we fit in some of these education pieces, right? The One Love is a great example. I'm not a huge fan of this being just a program on its own, but it's something that athletes and athletic departments really relate to because it deals with a lacrosse player from the University of Virginia. And it's about, for those of you who don't know about it, it's an escalation type workshop. So it talks about relationship violence and things like that. And if you've done any work in athletic departments, this is a really great one because, at least here, a lot of the issues that we deal with are inter-team relationships, right? So players dating each other, players within the same team dating each other, things like that. And so this starts to be very relevant for them. Like I said before, as with any of this, I don't advocate just doing that. I think you have to have more education and more talking about kind of One Love because there's some information out there that says that not everybody resonates with that storyline, so just make sure that we're doing that appropriately. Some of the other stuff that we have been doing, the My Playbook, this is an online training experience that most folks use for their freshman classes. It has up there freshman experience, but it's my understanding you can also use it for different levels of student athletes. So again, what we're trying to do is just kind of give it to them bite-size. Obviously, we don't want to overwhelm them. We don't want it to happen every single time we're talking to them. But if we can pick and choose strategically where we're putting it and how it's building on each other, that's really what we're trying to do here. So this next slide is really kind of the pie-in-the-sky dream that we would love to see happen here. We're still kind of in the beginning processes of kind of implementing this, but I will say this first year, we partnered again with our life skills, and our freshmen are going to be getting some training as well as our sophomores on this kind of stuff. So we're getting there. But really this is kind of what I explained, right? We want to give them bite-sized education that builds on each other, right? It's not really going to help everybody if we're making them go through the One Love escalation workshop every single year as an athlete, right? I think it's relevant, but again, it can't be the only thing that you're doing. And so basically, what we are hoping to do is year one, we want to do some kind of online training, whether that's My Playbook or I have up here EduRisk because that's the one that we have free through United Educators. I've said this in other spaces, but if you are getting insurance through United Educators, you should have access to EduRisk. It's free. For us, this is all we could afford right now. That might change if and when we get some funding, but for right now, this is what we're doing. That is the mandatory training that we want to have for our freshmen. Under there where it says additional initiatives, this was really us trying to get the athletic department to encourage students to participate in things cross campus, right? So asking them to participate in some kind of additional initiative throughout the year. So I have up on there, It's On Us Week. So when we did an It's On Us Week, I think this was last year, we partnered with the athletic department, and the name is escaping me right now, but there's an app that they use for community service and volunteer hours, and they're required to do a number of volunteer hours every year for this app. And we worked with them to put on, and so it's an app where you go in and it has all of the opportunities, the volunteer opportunities listed in that app. And we asked them if they would put on, some of our It's On Us Week activities in there so that they could volunteer, and we were asking the athletics department to encourage the students to kind of go to those events. And we ended up having a really great turnout. It was a win-win for everybody. They were learning about other things through It's On Us Week. They were getting community service hours. They were volunteering. They were being essentially these people who are well known throughout our university. Being seen at these events is always a really great thing. Those are leaders in your campus. And so it really worked out. So to the extent that you can do that, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the app, I'll look it up and get it to Carrie, but try doing that. What we'd like to see year 2 for our sophomores is possibly something on consent, and then after that, bystander intervention, and then healthy relationships. Healthy relationships, we talked about the year 4 folks, since they've already been through all of that stuff. Eventually, we'd like their initial initiative on their 4th year to become peer educators within the athletic department, right? So eventually, if you get enough people going through these, your training plan will be self-sustaining within the athletic department, right? And it's, again, a win-win because you're having these athletes that are going through this, they're learning all this stuff, and they're turning around and teaching their athletes. And we know that peer-to-peer education is so much more valuable than just the Title IX coordinator walking in there and kind of pointing a finger and saying, do this, do that, right? It's always going to sound better if it's coming from older athletes. Our staff training plans, again, staff's a little bit easier because we can mandate that they do certain stuff. They have a little bit more flexibility in their time, but again, it is tough to get them all in one room. But this is kind of some of the stuff that we have in our operating procedures. We do the annual training online. Unfortunately, they are going to have to take that every single year because the NCAA policy says we have to do it every single year. But again, I like that it's online. It lets them be able to do it at their convenience. I was able to obviously get my SWA on board and kind of put her to task for tracking these folks down. I would send her updated list to say this is who has finished, this who hasn't, things like that. So she was very good about kind of keeping accountability with our coaches. We have in our operating procedures that they have to attend the all-staff meeting unless they have some kind of excused absence from the AD or SWA. And we're also asking that they participate in at least one initiative or attend a presentation across campus because, again, we can't expect our students to go and do that if we're not modeling the same thing. It has to be important to our staff if it's going to be important to our students. And so that's really what we're encouraging there. And then this last piece is a really good piece if you are having trouble participation, getting this stuff in there, make it part of the annual staff review. I worked with our AD and our SWA to put in their annual staff reviews for our coaches that they will be in charge of getting the student athletes and encouraging them to go to life skills and finishing any of their or their subordinates' staff online trainings. And it was amazing. Again, we started with the life skills piece. We had kind of a low turnout for life skills. As soon as we put it into the staff review that the coaches had to make sure that they were encouraging their student athletes to go to that, our attendance for life skills immediately went up. So little tricks like that really help. And when you're putting it in something like a staff review, it really, again, gives that accountability piece that you can use. So these next couple of slides, I figured it might be helpful if you could see, I kind of already went through what I have in our operating procedures, but I wanted to kind of show you in practice kind of what it looks like when I go to those all-staff meetings and kind of what we did this year in case any of this resonates with you. So like I said, all employees were asked to complete an online training prior to the staff meeting, and really it's 2 online trainings for those of you who aren't familiar with EduRisk. It was a training, about 30-minute training on sexual violence and a 30-minute training or 40-minute training on harassment and discrimination based on protected class. So they had to go through that before they came to the all-staff meeting, and then in the all-staff meeting we went through updates, issues, and hot topics. So the first area that we went through, obviously I started with kind of a review of all of our cases that year. I don't give them names or identifiable information or anything like that, but if we had a case in the athletic department, I will say this is how many cases we had come out of the athletic department. These are the general nature of kind of what we were dealing with, right? This year I didn't have any cases that came out of the athletic department, so I just talked about what our numbers looked like over the entire institution based on our benchmark questions that we did through ODHE. So, and I did that because I didn't want them to think that it just wasn't happening, right? It just happened that this past year we didn't get any reports out of the athletic department. But, you know, we kind of went through that whole spiel of just because they're not getting reported doesn't necessarily mean it isn't happening, because look, here's the benchmark data for the rest of the university. We do know it's still happening here, and it very well might be happening in the athletic department. It might just not be getting reported. So we kind of went through that. And then the next thing I went through is one of the hot topics that we were dealing with, which is recruiting. And essentially how this played out was that we had an issue come up, as I don't know, most of you might have dealt with this before, but this was kind of our first time. Our athletic department was recruiting somebody with a history of a Title IX case at another institution. And it was brought to our attention, our office's attention, through an anonymous phone call. And so we kind of had to talk about what this looked like for the university, what steps did we need to be taking, liability purposes, risk management, should we be bringing this person to campus, things like that. So I took it as an opportunity to take it into the all-staff meeting to say, I realize that we've not touched on this topic before, but let's talk about it now, right? What should we be doing if we encounter a situation where we are recruiting an athlete with a previous Title IX history? And let's be honest, now that we're getting into year 3, year 4, year 5 of these cases being really prevalent, this is more and more likely going to happen, right? Because we know most people, not just athletes, who go through these processes, who are the accused, often drop out of different institutions because of these cases, or they leave before it's done, or things like that. So it's a very real likelihood that you might be getting a transfer into your athletic department that is coming here because of something like this. So we kind of wanted to put together a takeaway, again, a sheet of paper that the coaches could use, sample questions. I call it a recruiting questionnaire, but sample questions that we can put together that coaches, our recruiting coaches, should be asking when they're out on the road, looking at potential student athletes, talking to coaches, talking to AAU coaches, talking to high school guidance counselors, things like that, right? And what I found was most coaches don't understand what questions to ask. And even though we've been through a number of training to talk about how criminal investigations are different from university investigations, sometimes it just doesn't click for them when they're in this kind of situation out on the road, right? And how it plays out is they're talking to a student athlete or the student athlete's coach, and the coach or the student will say, yeah, I had some issues with Title IX, but I wasn't ever convicted, you know, in criminal court. And the coach will come back and tell me and say, blah, 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 this has happened, but they weren't convicted. And we'll have that conversation about, okay, that's great, but I need to know the other piece from the university and what happened with the university. I'm concerned that that part got left out, right? And the more we peel back the layers, we realize this person was actually found responsible of violating another policy and things like that. And so I gave them the benefit of the doubt and said, okay, maybe you just didn't understand what questions to ask. And so that's really what we did. We put together this questionnaire of sample questions that they should be asking the student athletes or the coaches or whoever to kind of get to the point of, is this a viable athlete or not, right? And so some of the questions on there obviously are obvious ones. You know, have you ever had a restraining order? If yes, when? Please provide details. Have you ever been subject to a university discipline process related to sexual misconduct, right? And then we give examples of different things that fall under that umbrella, right? Have you ever had a university protection or no contact order against you? When? List details, things like that. So a lot of different questions like this. And I really got this idea from, I think I read a news article that the University of Oklahoma was starting to do this. And so then when we had this situation come up, it was kind of the perfect storm to be able to put this in place. And then the big question that I added in here was that, are they willing to sign a release so that my office can access your educational record with respect to this kind of stuff? This is kind of the takeaway that I told all of the coaches. You know, if you don't remember any other question, if something comes up about a past Title IX incident, ask that student athlete if they would be willing to sign a release so that I can review their file. And if the answer is no, that's a red flag, right? And so, again, just kind of putting these takeaways in and talking about this hot topic because it had come up in our department is one of the areas that we focused on. Coming up short on time, so I'll kind of go through the next one. But the next big area that we did, contract clauses and actions of staff. For those of you who have never gone and looked at a head coaching contract, I encourage you to go do so. I got a copy of mine from General Counsel's office because I wanted to see, and this kind of came out after the whole Urban Meyer thing hit the airwaves. I wanted to know what our head coaching contract said about reporting, violating university policy, things like that. And what I found was our head coaching contracts have a clause in there that talks about how the head coaches are responsible for the actions of their staff. They are responsible for reporting certain things and that they can be fired for cause, which means without pay, for certain violations and things like that. So if you haven't done that, go explore that. If you don't have a clause in your contracts that speak to Title IX or reporting or anything like that, talk to your general counsel and talk to them about maybe putting something in there, putting a clause in there that will help you, again, just hold people accountable. Actions of staff, we kind of brought this up. We had, sorry, Carrie. We had a staff member who was at an outside event who was kind of displaying some behavior that we did not think was very representative of our brand. And we wanted to be able to hold them accountable, and we went and looked at the head coach's contract, and it talks about how they are responsible for any actions of the staff, even when they are outside of the university. So for us, it was just kind of a reminder to the staff to say, hey, this is in a head coaching contract. You know, we will be able to hold you accountable, and we will be able to hold your head coach accountable for your actions. So just be mindful of that. So that was a way for us to put the people like assistant coaches on staff, but also the head coaches on staff to say, you know, keep your staff in line, or we can get, you know, we can fire you for cause for that staff. Okay, so last thing, and this is kind of just the bottom line. I always try to leave them with something that is like, bottom line, this is what you should take away. And what I had thought I was going to do was kind of go through some of the national level reports that had come out. But the more I started to look at everything, they all kind of had the same takeaway. And that was, you know, 9 times out of 10, the university is going to protect itself before it protects you as a coach or an assistant coach or something like that. And so don't put yourself in a position where you get thrown under the bus because, again, when push comes to shove, the university is going to protect its brand way before it protects a head coach or a coach. Especially at an institution like Wright State, we have a couple good programs, but, you know, we're not a top 5 Power 5 conference, right? And so don't put yourself in that position. This last bullet point was kind of, again, reflective of all the national cases that had come out. And this is a lot of times what staff in athletics don't really understand is that stop trying to put it under the rug. Stop trying to not call me and tell me what is happening, right? Because it's not always an automatic no. I don't have the power to have it be an automatic no. Most decisions that come up here, I have to run by the president or general counsel or things like that. And the point in talking about this is how it works is you tell me what's going on, right? I do my due diligence. I talk to the right people, and we make a decision. It might be a yes. It might be a no. But the point is, if we are on notice and we take all those steps and do our due diligence, if and when we make the wrong decision or something happens, It's always going to sound better if our response is, we knew about it, we looked into it, and this is the decision we made. You might not like the decision we made, but we knew about it and we did our due diligence. If we came to the wrong answer, we came to the wrong answer. That is always going to be a better response than we had no idea about this as a Title IX office, right? And so really just communicating that message kind of to the athletic department, they seem to resonate kind of with that message. And then lastly, I'll just talk real quickly what I've learned. A sports background is really helpful. It allows me to speak their language. I realize that I have a little bit of privilege in that area because I was a former college athlete. But if you have somebody on your staff that has a sports background, let them go in. Because every time I go into an athletic space, the first thing that they say when they introduce me is that I was a college athlete. That buys me almost immediate street cred in their spaces. So if you have somebody on staff that even remotely is connected to athletics, send them in for the training, right? Think about that when you're hiring. You know, if you're lucky enough to be able to hire more people, think about that as a qualification. Do you have a background in athletics? If you're having trouble getting into the athletic department, think about that the next time you have an open position. Hot topics around athletics, we talk about that. Giving them takeaways, utilizing life skills, we've kind of already talked about that. Understanding the time constraints on athletics, that is a real issue, and you are always going to have athletic people that tell you that, so be prepared to answer that in a way that's constructive and helpful. Asking for feedback from your partners. I already talked about that, but continually ask them, was that helpful? What do you want me to talk about? What do you need to know? Send them a survey. Do something like that to really constantly be checking in with them. And then the last thing here that's really worked for me, probably more than any of this, is show up for them. Don't just be that person that comes into the meeting as a compliance person who yells at them, tells them policy procedure, and walks out of the room. You are going to have so much better results if you start to show up for them. And what I mean by that is take time out of your day to go to one of their games. Take time out of your night to go to one of their fundraising events. It's great to be seen at athletic events, right? And I have found just showing up for them in those kinds of spaces buys me a lot of credit with them. Because it helps them understand that I care more about them and more about just compliance, right? I care about you all as people. I care about you all as in a department, and I'm going to show you that by showing up at your events and things like that. So if you're having trouble getting in there, I would start there. Start showing up, start building relationships with those people, and then use those personal relationships to kind of get into those training into those spaces. So I've pretty much taken up all of the time. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer if people have questions. You also can always email me, call me. I'm pretty available. If any of you have talked to anybody who's talked to me, I'll pretty much always take your call and just tell you what I know and what I do and see if that helps. So.
Thanks, Lindsay. If there's any questions, feel free to type those into the chat room, and I'll be happy to relay them to Lindsay. I know one of the early questions, and you did qualify at the start of your presentation that you are an NCAA school. I think a lot of what you said was applicable regardless of whether you're NCAA school and NAIA or whatnot. Is there anything else that you would add or points that you would pull, highlights that might be applicable regardless if you're an NCAA school or what division even in NCAA you are?
Yeah, I mean, obviously your time constraints are going to be different depending on what division you are within the NCAA. And so I would encourage you to go and look at what those time constraints are. I don't know them off the top of my head. So you might have an easier time, with the time limits. What I will say in terms of NAIA and NCAA and whatever conference you belong to, my understanding is that the majority of rulemaking and policymaking and just kind of overall how we do things starts at the NCAA level and is kind of a model for other areas. And so I would not be surprised if you start to see this kind of all over the place, no matter what kind of athletic conference you belong to, whether you're, NJIT, whether you're an NAIA, so that's really just what I would say. I would still use it as leverage to say, this is what NCAA schools are doing. I think we should do it too. So that's just my 2 cents. I would check in with your athletic department, though, and see what they are saying at their national level meetings, their regional meetings. Is anybody talking about this kind of stuff? Things like that.
And I think there's a lot of, and Lindsay, you may disagree, and if so, please jump in, but I feel like there's a lot of things that the NCAA is putting out in the face of good practices, maybe best practices along these lines, just, to protect student athletes. And so I think even if the conference isn't requiring it, I think what I hear you saying is there's a lot of things that we can learn from that, from the way the NCAA is leading on this, and we could even work to take it a step further if needed.
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Awesome. I am not seeing any other questions, and we are pretty much at that time. I know Lindsay, as she said, she's always willing to talk with anybody or respond to them, and I can personally attest to that. So would definitely encourage you to reach out to her if you have any questions. If you'd like a copy of the webinar, you can always email me after this, and I'd be happy to send it to you, and that way you can share it with others that maybe were unable to participate from your campus today. But other than that, I just want to say thank you, Lindsay, so much, and thank you to all of you who joined today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.